Welcome back to Unfiltered Unspoken. And I told you we're going to keep bringing it to you. And we got a vet on here today, Sean Young, and he has been through some traumas in his life. But of course, I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about himself. So I'm going to bring up Sean Young. Thank you for coming on Unfiltered Unspoken, Sean.
Thanks for having me, Dimitri. You know that intro was sick. That intro was sick. That
Thank
that intro
you.
video was sick. I was just sitting here. I was like, man, I need something like that.
Thank you.
Anyways, yeah. So like Dimitri said, my name is Sean Young. I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I'm also a person in long-term recovery. So what that means for me is that I haven't put a substance in my body, a mind-altering substance in my body, since December 7th, 2019. And by doing that, I was able to discover who I was, work through my trauma, as well as become a better father, a better um, life partner, a better friend, better mentor, a better on all around better human being. Um, it also opened up a lot of doors, a lot of avenues. When one door closes, 10 more open. I do my own podcast, I Dimitri on, and I'm just really happy to be here.
Awesome, awesome. We're glad to have you. Now let's dig in. We start from the beginning. We always start from the beginning. A lot of things we go through normally we have an origin. So, what was home like life like as a child? Did you experience, any trauma within your home? How was that like for you?
Oh, absolutely, Sid. Thanks for the question. Yeah, life was shitty for me as a kid. My first bit of trauma I experienced was seeing my father be stabbed in the back as a young kid, like 3 or 4. That's one of my first traumatic experiences I've ever witnessed. And to see somebody that you label as your hero go down in such a fashion. I mean, he's still alive, thank God. But to see someone that you care about and you love go down in that fashion, it really starts to mess with the psyche. And then a little bit later on in life, my father would end up taking a lot of his anger and his frustration out on me. The first time that I really had this unwavering fear for my father was when I was 4. I was in the bathtub splashing around like every little kid does, and he walks in and sees this mess on the floor, grabs a belt, beats my ass, bare ass, and because of that, we were taken away from my mother and my father, put in foster care, and then not adopted, but brought into foster care by my grandparents who lived in Sharpsburg, Maryland, way in the backwoods of Maryland. And there, a lot of people don't understand that there can be religious trauma too. Obviously, within churches and organizations, there can be a lot of sexual assault, sexual harassment, but the religious trauma of having a religion shoved down your throat and living the lifestyle that you have to live was one that I faced. I was put up to be baptized, and then when I said I wanted to be baptized, I was told that I was only doing it for the attention. Which, as a kid at 7, 8 years old, I didn't understand what my grandparents were doing to me when they said that, but it really started to mess me up because I started feeling this bit of unacceptance and not being worthy, not being worth it, and that really started to fuck me up a little bit. And later on, a little bit later on, I would move in with my dad. He moved to Erie, Pennsylvania, so it's like right up on the Lake Erie, in between Ohio and Buffalo, or sorry, Ohio and New York. And he would shift his anger from my sister to me, and it started out small with verbal things, emotional, mental abuse, and then it turned to physical. I remember the first time that I was deathly afraid of my dad and thought he was going to kill me. He grabbed me by the throat and squeezed me and lifted me in the air, dead ass, looked at me in the face and said, "I'm gonna fucking kill you," and destroyed me, right? Because I didn't understand why this was happening. It just came out of the blue like that. And it got progressively worse to the point where I was going, he would send me to the backyard. I'd go in the backyard. He'd throw me from fence post to fence post in our backyard, and he'd hit me in the back of the head with his elbow. And then it would happen in the garage. nobody in the neighborhood would say anything because they were terrified of my dad. My dad's not a very imposing guy, but he has an anger issue, and it it was a substance issue that that showed itself through anger. So I felt a lot of his anger. On top of that, he would get shit faced drunk in the drive with me in the car, and so we're doing that, and then we get to the house, and he shuts the garage door, keeps the car on, and has the smoke coming in the car, right? So like that's it could be portrayed as a suicide attempt or whatever, but I was put in a lot of precarious situations when I was a kid where I just didn't want to. I didn't want to be alive anymore. I never thought about suicide one bit as a kid. It would become later on relevant in my life, but I never thought about suicide as a kid. I just didn't necessarily want to be alive because I just didn't feel like I fit in.
Mm. So, through the abuse and the traumas from your dad, so your mom's not in the picture, I'm assuming, once your grandparents send you back to your dad. But what were some of the signs? What did the trauma do to you, like your behavior, your actions?
Oh, I learned unhealthy coping mechanisms. Would I wouldn't talk about my feelings or my emotions because I was called names that would be considered uplifting now, but derogatory back in the day. I'd be called gay if I talked about my feelings and my emotions, and it really fucked me up. So it told me that I couldn't talk about my feelings or my emotions. Not to mention, I would go to sleep. I would sleep everything off because that was my safe space. That was the place that I knew that I could be safe from everything in the outside world. And I started going when things were getting really bad. I would start going to my extracurricular activities that I was doing at school, and I would stay way longer past it. So I was avoiding going home. And when I started working, I would work late hours to the point where they had to say, go home now. So I would avoid going home. So I wouldn't have to be around it. I was extremely introverted as a kid. Like, I mean, I, I had these school functions, but I wouldn't reach outside of this small friends group. And it was rough. It was really rough.
Now, on the flip side, we do see, quotes and sayings like, only the strong survive, or things of that nature. And, you've given us the kind of the negatives that kind of followed you based off of that behavior. What do you feel now? Looking back on things has, braced you for life, or what do you feel like actually had become an advantage? Having to survive the way that you had to survive and live the way that you live. What can you now see that is a benefit that comes with being a survivor of things like this?
Well, I'm not going to say that I don't like that saying, but that's not saying that I use very often. The only strong survive, because at the end of the day, it made me weaker. It really did. It tore me down. It led me into a path later on in life that would ultimately play my downfall. There are good things that I learned out of it. Obviously, I look at my situation from my father and my interaction with my father, and I realized that's not the kind of father I want to be. It's not the kind of human I want to be. That's not the kind of partner that I want to be to my wife or my significant other later on in life. And so I really started to try and change the way that I thought about things, because I understood the way he thought about things. And so I wanted to change my perspective on things in life. And it took a lot of work. On top of that, I learned resilience, right? Like, I learned that there's nothing so bad that can't be worked through. I would come to that understanding later on in life, but those are two things. I didn't want to be like my father, so I did everything in my power not to be, and resilience.
Okay. So leading from the traumas, did your mother ever come back into the picture, Sean?
About the age of 21.
Really? So did she have an addiction or was something?
Yes. So my mother and my father split up right before he moved up to Pennsylvania. And my mother had visitation with us, but from my understanding, she was in active addiction at that time. She was doing a lot of different drugs to include like heroin and shit. And my dad was over here drinking and doing coke. And so they were doing separate things. They ended up splitting. My dad went to Pennsylvania. My mom stayed in Maryland. And when I moved up to Pennsylvania, the contact between my mom and myself started to diminish really quickly. She ended up moving to Virginia Beach. And then next thing I know, I got a phone call from her on a Saturday saying, "Hey, I'm not going to talk to you until you're old enough to understand the truth." So I've lost a lot at that point.
Wow. That's tough. We always feel that it's out of place, and we feel that mothers, it's hard. It seems more hard for mothers to be able to do that. But like everybody has their breaking point, and everybody reacts to things differently. All that we can come to the conclusion of is that they both had the responsibility to take care of you and or find adequate care and did not. So regardless of what you got going on, you gotta map that out. You're not the only person involved. So I'm completely sorry for having to go through that as a child. Um, Now with all of that kind of going on, outside of the things that teachers or anybody that may have come in contact with you should have noticed, on a physical level or even emotional level. Did you ever outright verbally tell anybody what was going on, or that you may have needed help, or anybody that asked you that you were honest with?
I told my best friend, and my best friend knew everything from point A to point, to Z and everything in between. And I didn't tell adults because I didn't trust adults, right? That foundation of trust that we're supposed to develop at a young age was not there. Um, I started learning very unhealthy trust habits and at that young age, right? So I would blanket out my trust, and then if somebody were to break that trust, it would absolutely crush me. But the thing is I'll set myself up for failure by not talking to adults about things, not talking to somebody that mattered. The thing with the whole situation is my dad would do things that would not leave a mark on me. I played baseball when I was a kid. So if my dad was in the garage, which it was a very common thing. He'd throw baseballs at me, and his scapegoat would be he plays baseball. He got hit by a baseball. So, yeah, and the when I ended up ultimately getting kicked out of my house at the age of 16, he chased me around the neighborhood with a phone book because he knew a phone book wouldn't leave marks. And so, yeah, he caught me a few good times, and so not only like is that happening, but there's a little thing that's happening when you're hitting the brain multiple times, and I was catching concussions prior to even joining the army, which is where I started developing traumatic brain injury. But that is where the origins of my concussion started, was because he was hitting me in the head like a UFC fighter would hit an opponent. It was ridiculous.
Wow. Wow. So from your I want to go back because how did you get from your grandparents' house? They took custody of your dad,
Yeah.
sent you to your grandparents' house.
Yep.
How did he get custody back?
So when child services, I don't know if they do this so much anymore, but from my understanding, they sent an agent to the house where my mom and my dad were living, and they were watching movements, right? They were watching to see who interacted with who, how they interacted, and they caught my mom on a day where she was screaming and yelling at my dad. And so they ultimately had it in their mind that my mom was the bad guy and had to wait until my dad left my mom in order to give my dad custody. So when he ended up leaving, they were like, you can have custody of your kids now. Yeah, without knowing anything else that was, had happened in between that time.
So y'all never told them that your dad was abusing you?
No, I mean, my dad took credit. So my dad took accountability of what happened when I was like 4 years old. But all that stuff that was happened after he got custody of me, right? So like, it was he was like, I have it, and now I'm just going to do with it what I please.
Jesus, ooh, that's rocky. We've heard so many. Like, we have a lot of podcasts, and granted, it's been such a short time, but the amount of times we've heard that these courts and these institutions fail these kids is ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
And it don't seem to get any better. We can't blame old age, even judges and officials aging out. Nothing's changing, and it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Too much money and resources go into that system for it to be so slack.
Well, then on top of that, you have, and this wasn't my experience, but you have foster parents that are supposed to be taking care of the kids, and they're supposed to provide what's best for the child, but yet they're using that child as a paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
It's a money-making business. It is. And you'll see people with 4, 5, 6 kids. It's all because of the money.
Yeah. And it has nothing to do with the kid and what's best for the kid. It's all about the money. And that's where problems start. I mean, if we're talking about it, that's where problems start. It's the shitty parenting.
Absolutely. And, with that being said, what was kind of, I guess, that kind of spark moment that you were just like, anything I gotta do to get up out of here, what seems like it's probably the military for you. What was kind of that moment, that key moment where you made a decision enough was enough?
Well, so I ended up getting kicked out, like I said, at the age of 16, and I moved down. I was sent back down to my grandparents, the ones that I lived with before. And when I moved back down here, that was like one of the best years of my life as a teenager, right? Because I was working. I felt fulfilled. I was gonna graduate early. I was into my spirituality, so I was going to church. I was studying the Word and all that stuff, and I wanted to be a pastor. And I had this path set out, and I was going to go to Bible school in Columbus, Ohio, and all this stuff. And then my dad, I told him my plan, and he said, "No, you're going to join the military." And I said, "The fuck I am." And he was like, "You're going to join the military because that's what you're going to do. And if you don't, I'm going to kick you out of my family." And I was like, dude, I cannot win, right? Like, I was like, there is no winning in this situation for me. So it came down to the point where he drove down from Pennsylvania to my grandparents' house. And he was like, "Get in the car now." Drove me out to a recruiting station, and I had to sign a contract that day. So we got to the recruiting station, and I walked in, and the Navy had their door open, and they said, "We're going to see if you're smart enough to join the Navy." And I said, "I don't want to join you if that's the approach you're holding toward me." And then the Army said, "What do you want to do with your life?" And I said, "This is where I want to be." So essentially, it wasn't me making a decision. It was me being forced. It's like a forced marriage, right? Like, you have to marry this family because they're prestigious. Well, now I have to join the Army because I said so, or you lose everything you've ever had.
So when did your grandparents didn't step in at any point, and were they scared of your dad?
Yeah, they were scared. The only person that wasn't afraid of my dad was my uncle.
And where was Uncle at?
Uncle didn't care.
Was he on drugs by any chance as well?
Later on in life, yes, but he was a part of an organization that has 3 letters. If you get my drift,
you don't have. I get it.
So he didn't give a shit about anybody but himself.
Wow.
And so I mean, I was left to the wind. The only person that really cared about me was my aunt, and I still love that woman to this day. And she was the only one that was like, hey, this is fucked up. You can't be doing this. My dad was like, he's not your son.
Was she
So
scared of him?
no, they've gotten into fistfights before.
Okay, go auntie.
Auntie will throw hands. Auntie will throw hands.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dang,
Yeah.
it's sad that your grandparents even had to go through that and live through that.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Yeah.
Now, was the push just based on, kind of like lineage, everybody in the family is a military thing, or was there some other type of benefit he was trying to obtain from you going?
So he said, essentially, you need structure. You're not equipped to go to college. You're not equipped to study. But he didn't know me. He didn't understand my work ethic. He didn't understand any of that. But there were things that were happening behind the scenes that I didn't know about and I would find out later on in life. Well, at least a little bit later on, not too far in the future. But there was a lot of things that were happening behind the scenes that were done dirty to me. And I was just like, dude, this can't get any worse.
He wasn't stealing your credit, was he?
He was taking my money that I was working my ass off for in the Army. Because he had access to my bank account and he wouldn't give me my debit card. He said you gotta learn how to balance a checkbook. So here's your checkbook.
Well, he just stealing your money.
Yep.
See, that's why I was asking, because I was like, it's almost like you have to have somebody at home taking care of your affairs in a sense, when you're in the military. So like,
yeah.
But he was 18, Sid.
That too, like, who else to do it? Who else? Because if there was somebody more equipped to do it, they probably would have been taking care of them.
Yeah. Well, I had my stepmom. My stepmom was a part of my dad's life, and so I guess we'll fast forward into that part. I was spending a lot less money than I was making, and so I would annotate in my checkbook. Checkbooks. I was doing everything, and I would write a check, go to a bank, cash it, and they would say, "Okay, give me the money." Well, when I went in one time, they knew me because I was always in there, at least once a month, and I was always in there, and so they looked at me and they were like, "Hey, Mr. Young, your last check bounce." And I said, "That's not possible." And I looked at my checkbook and I gave it to them and I said, "You know how much I've been pulling out. I don't have a debit card." Boom. And they said, "Well, we advise that you call your bank." So I called the bank from back at home and they tallied up all of these withdrawals that were happening in the city. And I told them, I said, I don't live there anymore. And I haven't lived there in X amount of time. And they added it up and it was a significant amount of money. I called my dad and I said, "Hey, Dad, I don't know what you're using my money for, but I don't appreciate you taking my money. You make your own. Stepmom makes hers. I need this to survive." And he said, "Oh, I'm just paying rent with it, or I'm paying the mortgage." And I said, "Well, if you needed help, all you had to do was ask." And then I called my stepmom and I said the same thing. "Hey, if you needed any help, you should have just asked because I have no problems helping out." And she said, my paycheck pays the mortgage. And I wouldn't find out until later on what he was doing with it. And he was going and putting it up his nose.
That's what I was going to say. It probably was the drug addiction piece of it. Wow. That is sad. So did you change your bank account? Like, did you get a whole new bank account to stop him?
I did. Yeah. I got a whole new bank account and I took everything out of his name. The only thing is he ended up getting into recovery and he paid every bit of that money back, which I was happy about. I was like, "Hey, at least I get my fucking money back."
Yeah,
it was like 2 years later on down the road, but I still got my money back.
That's good. At least he paid you back, because a lot of parents, they just damage their kids' credit or take their money and they don't get anything back. So let's go into, because you had some, and I'm assuming, but you're gonna tell us, you had some traumas and addictions too, correct?
Oh yeah.
Can you tell
Oh
us
yeah.
a little bit about that and how it
Yep.
started?
Yep. So my addiction really started in the Army. I joined the Army. My first day in basic training was July 11th, 2006, my birthday. Turned 18, my first day of basic. And I would I would go to my basic training, my advanced individual training. I joined the airborne, so they taught me how to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. And I would get stationed in Italy. Now in Italy, there's no drinking age whatsoever. And when you first get there, there's supposed to be this grace period of like 21 days where you don't drink. I was not given that grace period. They said, "Hey, you're left to your own devices." So I had nothing to do on the weekends, and I just started drinking. My first time that I drank like a professional drinker. I drank all night. I killed it. I killed a bottle to myself, but then if we're going to go into how much I drank in total, we'll call it 3 or 4 bottles. And I drank a lot, and it didn't phase me at all. I wasn't drunk, none of that. I didn't wake up with a hangover. So I was like, this is what it's all about. And I just kept going. And for 5 months, that's how it was. And in that 5 months, I drank a lot. I ended up getting deployed at the end of that 5 months. And we went to Afghanistan for 15 months. I got back from that deployment and I was back drinking again. Like literally 30 minutes off of the plane, back in my room, drinking again. And I would drink heavy for the next year. I met a woman at a club. We ended up drinking together a lot. I would get shit faced every night. I didn't understand the concept of moderation. And we ended up dating and getting engaged. I went on my second deployment. So in my first deployment, I had this like stance in life where like I don't give a shit if I live or die because I have nobody to live for, right? Everybody in my life, for the most part, has done me dirty. And so I don't give a shit. If I get killed, I get killed, whatever. I'll go out like a hero. My second deployment, I was scared because I had somebody to live for at that point. My mom had also come back in my life at that point, and there was a lot of trying to mend that relationship. But halfway through that deployment, I found out my at the time fiance had been cheating on me. So then I broke up with her and got to this point where I don't give a shit. Now my Army story and like my addiction story is super long. That is where it started. I do have trauma attached, but it comes a little bit later on.
Well, we're gonna try to get as much. We're gonna try to get as much of it as we can. So
Absolutely.
All right, now, you know, going past when it started, what was your next notable moment? Did you get in any trouble in regard to being drunk or alcohol?
Oh, I got in a ton of trouble. Always, I was always in trouble. I was a nuisance. I was a motherfucking problem. But they could never pin an alcohol related incident on me, right? I was always drinking, but I was always doing something else, right? So they were like, "Oh, we cannot prove how much you've been drinking because we can't get a breathalyzer on you, but we're going to get you for this other thing." So everybody was like, "You got a problem drinking." And I was like, "Fuck you. You have a problem with my drinking, right?" Like I didn't see it as a problem. I was just like, I'm the good time. You guys suck. That's how it was. But it was completely different, completely asinine. I got in a lot, other trouble. I went back home for my R&R and on my second deployment, and I was single, and I went out drinking. Actually, that whole 18 days I wasn't sober one bit, like at all. And that doesn't just include alcohol. Like there was substance, other harder shit involved. And there was one time where we had left this club, and I was with this girl and one of my best friends from my first deployment. And she walks out and she said, "Who wants to drive? I'm too drunk to drive." My buddy said, "Hey, I've only had 2 drinks tonight." And I said, "Give me the fucking keys." And I'm absolutely gone by this point. And I drove. And not to mention at the time, I didn't have my license. Right. So there's a lot going on in this. And we pull out and we go on the highway, and I do a U-turn in the middle of the highway and drive on the opposite end opposite side of the road. It was open end, there was no divider in the middle. And I pull into this gas station to get cigarettes, and I pull out. As soon as I pull out, cops pull up, like 3 or 4 of them pull up behind me. And I stop. They say, hey, how much have you had to drink tonight? And I was honest. I said, hey, I've drank a lot. I handed them my military ID. I didn't have a license. I handed them my military ID. And they asked why I was why I was home. I told them. And then instead of locking me up, which they should have fucking locked me up, highly irresponsible if they didn't, they said, follow us to the hotel. They got me back to the hotel where I was staying at and said, don't leave tonight. That should have been my wake-up call, and it wasn't.
Oh, wow. So can you tell us some of the drugs that you chose, and how long was your alcohol addiction, and how long was the drug addiction?
Here's the most fucked up part about this whole situation. I'm a full-blown alcoholic by this point, right? I tested out with some drugs. I tested out with coke, acid, smoked a little bit of weed. And I looked at it and I said, I like this too much. I'm going to get addicted. That is the fucking crazy mindset that I had, right? I was like, I don't want to get addicted to these harder substances, so I'm just not going to do them. But I was already a full-blown alcoholic at that point.
I mean, it's self-awareness. It's
self-awareness. But see, that probably came, or Sean, that probably came from you watching your parents do drugs. So that was an automatic no.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even then, like when I was in the Army, that was super illegal. Like it was illegal outside the Army, but it was really illegal inside the Army. I could have gotten in a lot of trouble had I got piss tested, but nobody was getting piss tested at the time. So I just looked at it. I was like, I just can't do this anymore because I like it too much. And I loved the feeling of being so fucked up and being able to hallucinate things that weren't there. Right. I loved that feeling. Right. And I loved the feeling of go, 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 or the feeling of calm down. Right. There is no, like I said before, I don't understand the gray area in life. For me, it's either black or white. Right. And like, that's how it was. It was either super high or super low. My alcohol addiction lasted 18 to 31. Yeah, 18 to 31. So it lasted a while.
Now, what I guess in comparison to normal sober you, what was it about drinking that you actually enjoyed, or what were the differences that kind of came about once you were drunk? What about the feeling did you like? What did you think it was that you were trying to compensate for?
I thought I was fucking Superman. I thought I was indestructible, right? Like you can't touch me. I didn't want to fight. I loved to party. I'd go out to clubs all the time. I loved dancing. It was that way for me to shed all of the feeling of guilt for looking like a dumbass if I did something. It was my way of shedding that skin of being nervous, right? If somebody said, hey, let's go dance, I'm like, fuck it, let's go, right? Let's have fun, let's fuck it, whatever. But if I was sober and somebody said, let's go dance, I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm just going to sit right here. And that's how it was, right? And it gave me an excuse to act like an asshole and then blame the alcohol for it. Like, if I went out and I got fucked up and I came back to my room and I destroyed my room and somebody walks in the morning and they're like, you destroyed your room. I'm like, yeah, well, I was fucked up last night. I wouldn't do that if I was sober. So it was my way of excusing my assholish ways and saying that's not who I am. But I always had this saying, if you hadn't met drunk Sean, you don't know the real me. I associated with that. I thought that's who I was.
And is that a part of all the traumas that you went through as a child? I guess that having fun piece. You couldn't do it as a child. So when you got older, you were just away from everything and said, you know what, I'm going to do this now as an adult.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When I was cut free, I literally cut free, and I just didn't give a shit about anything.
Did you find that, or come to a conclusion that people, enjoyed you more while drunk or sober? And how did that kind of mold the way which you were going and twisting and turning?
It depended on who you talk to, right? Some people, they'd be like, "Oh, I absolutely love Sean when he's drunk. He's the best." And then there's other people that were like, "He's a piece of shit." Like, and I still have those friends and those acquaintances that are like, "You were a real piece of shit," and I'm like, "Yeah, I know. I'm sorry." Like, that's who I was. That's not who I am now.
Well, it's good you take accountability for everything. I mean, that's you see a lot of folks stray away from the accountability piece of it. But I have a question. Did your dad ever apologize for everything that he did to you?
So he got sober in 2010, and in the process of getting clean, he did make amends to me. We would fight a lot, like later on, about some of the shit that happened. But my dad's relationship, our relationship is much better now. Like, I actually just went to his house today and
Good.
yesterday.
So what about mom? Did she ever tell you the full story? She said when you get older, and did she ever apologize and take accountability?
That's the part. I got to this point in my life where I said, I want to find out the truth. I want to hear your side of the story, and I want to find your side of the story. My dad took accountability for every damn thing that he did. And my mom blamed my dad for everything. And I said, that's all I need to know. I said, I don't need to know anything else. Now, my relationship with my mom is non existent. Yeah.
That's a strange turn of events. Really, but not really. Because in a sense, the parent that's there is usually the one that, bears the brunt of the frustrations of, raising a child. So, since he was there, it probably happened that way. And, she got the skate. So, he has some different things to apologize for, but I'm sure a lot of that was frustrating. With him, it's not like one of them had the addiction and one didn't. Circumstances were the same, and he still was handling business, to the best of his capacity. So I understand why he, may have been frustrated and laid down that road for sure. But it sucks that she didn't, even after all of them years, and you still can't understand.
Yeah, there's a situation that ended up happening probably 4 or 5 years ago, and that really kind of cemented to me what kind of human being she was. And then I tried to build that bridge back, and I tried to talk with her and understand with her and reason with her, and it was going good for a month. And then it got to the point where she was like, "You always choose your dad over me," and I was like, I'm your fucking son. I don't choose, right? I'm not choosing you. I'm not choosing him. I just want my parents. And she couldn't understand that concept, and she started getting super toxic. And I said, I don't need it.
Is she still on drugs?
Nope.
She's clean.
She's never worked a program though.
I was just about to ask, like, did she do this on her own? Because in kind of more structured, I guess, classes or treatment, they do focus heavily on like the healing part and your atonement and things like that. So some those kind of strong-willed people enough to do enough just to turn it off, like, it's going to be hard to turn off everything else wrong about them.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
You can run away from the substance, but it's not about the substance, it's about the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And she's not taking accountability for anything. So
nope. I mean, in a crazy kind of sordid sense, it's just like, yeah, I was strong enough to do that. Like, you really can't tell me nothing.
Right.
You
Yeah,
know
but
what I
what,
mean? Like
what
that's what it is. Like you can't tell me what's right and what's wrong, or you know what I mean? Like I did this. Like that's probably how she feel, but you know, you gotta humble yourself.
do you
I
respect her? Do you
I
respect her or
I love my mom,
mm-hmm.
but I can love her from a distance. I respect my mom because she is my mom,
Mm-hmm.
but I can respect her for at a distance. I don't have to be up in her business. She doesn't have to be up in mine. That's how it is.
You know, probably I get probably about 8 times out of 10 her relationship and the way she moves with other people maybe that she has met after she became sober is probably something totally different. I feel like she maybe has to have that hard exterior with people that know, you know what I'm saying, her past,
Hmm.
and you know, can do kind of real time comparisons rather than, you know, people that can just kind of pick up and she can move on and
Yeah.
move freely without the stigma. So
Yeah.
that's probably what's going on. It was just a matter of pushing everybody else out and trying to, you
Yeah,
know, really move forward without having to face it.
yeah,
Oh
she
yeah.
doesn't want to be associated with her past.
No. No,
Yeah.
she doesn't.
Because it's going to have to come up. It's going to have to come up some way, somehow. Even if, you know, you don't even blatantly just talk about it, it's something's going to happen that, you know, correlates back to you guys' relationship and why it was that way. So it's gonna force her to face it. So, you know, on the flip side, I can understand why somebody doesn't, but you know, it's tough to know that they're doing better or in a mind frame that they can understand and they just refuse not to.
Yeah. Absolutely agree.
Yeah. And you know, how have you, I guess what, you know, kind of have you told yourself to be able to, you know, move past that, even though we're like, you know, we're good, we've went this long without this person or whatnot, you know, how did you, you know, absolutely just kind of come to grips with it? And do you, you know, have any hope that it may come around still?
So, with this situation that happened with me this past December, I got to a point where I could no longer, at that time, I could no longer be the strong one for people. I needed people to be fucking strong for me, right? Because I've been strong for people so long, and I needed people to be strong for me. And so I started putting those feelers out. But it wasn't like I was putting them out and keeping them there, right? So I would put it out and I'd say, I know this person can be strong for me, right? I know this person. And now in that situation, there were two people that I was looking at specifically. You motherfuckers need to be strong for me. And that was my mom and my dad. And my dad was super strong for me, but he wasn't the strong that I wanted. He was the strong I needed. He was the one that was telling me, like, look, dude, this it's fucking bad. And like it's gonna get worse if you don't change something about your situation. And my mom was the one that was like, "Oh, fuck her," blah blah. And I'm like, "That's not what I need to hear. That's not what I. It's not about her. It's about me, right? Like, let's get this clear." And so when I would call her, I would call and I would just go to talk to her about things and everything like that. And then it would go from me talking about things to her trying to relate to me, but like making it about her. I was like, Mom, like this shit ain't about you. If you have a problem, go to your counselor. I should not be trying to counsel you as your son. And it just kept going down that road. And I just said, you know what? Like I can't do that. So I changed, locations of where I live. And when I changed location, she started blowing up my phone, trying to guilt trip me, gaslight me. And I was just like, I'm done. I didn't even respond to it. I just blocked her on everything.
And that's okay. Your peace comes first. So do not
Oh, yeah.
disturb. And it's okay to put that do not disturb up. But also, so I know you're doing some wonderful things and you've taken all this trauma and you're putting it into a lot of work that you're doing because that's what a lot of us do, right? Take the trauma to help others. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things from your trauma that you're helping people with?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that I'm doing now is I'm working with justice involved veterans. So, veterans that are in the criminal justice system for either substance abuse, violent crime, anything really. And I bring them into a process group every week, and we talk about a topic, whatever the topic may be. It could be trauma related, substance related. It could be just, hey, dude, how's your day going? How's your week going? And I feel that's important too, to do a check in, not just like continuously doing a topic. And so I really start helping these men and women, these veterans, break down those communication barriers that they have with society, right? Because when you step out, for veterans, when we step out of service, we have a hard time, as is, trying to communicate with people and talk to them and relate to them. But then you take it a step further and you add violent crimes into it. You add drug or alcohol related crimes. You add addiction into it and severe compounded mental health disorders into the situation. And that barrier of communication all of a sudden becomes a wall. And so I help them break down the barrier of communication and help them try to change their thought process. On top of that, I do train people in the state of Alaska. I live in Maryland now. I train people in the state of Alaska to be peer support specialists. And what a peer support specialist is somebody that uses their experience in recovery with addiction and mental health disorders to help other people recover from what is ailing them. So I'm a peer support trainer, but I'm also a peer support specialist, registered or certified in the state of Alaska. I would like to get that transferred over here, but hey, I'm making moves to get that changed. And also social media on TikTok, I talk about the things that are very taboo. I talk about the substance abuse disorder. I talk about trauma. I talk about mental health disorders because it's something that as a society we claim to be taboo, right? We want to talk about it and we want to talk about our feelings, but we don't want to talk about them openly. And so when we talk about them openly, we kind of show other people that they're not alone, and we give them the platform and the space to be able to talk about those things so that they don't feel so bad and so ashamed of the way that they feel. And then finally, I do my podcast. And I think for me, my podcast is the most beneficial thing to me because I'm always constantly reminded of one or two things every episode that I talk to people about that I learned from my early recovery, and that I may not have forgotten, but maybe, in a box buried away and I got to dig it back out. Or I talk to people and I just remember the feeling of what they go through. So it keeps me humbled and it keeps me able to be in the moment and be able to actively listen to other people and be able to use those tools and those skills that I learned in my early recovery continuously on and on.
That's great. That's great. And what, with that being said, what is it that also that you are working towards? What type of extension of your services are you trying to complete? What would be your overall, goal that you're reaching to achieve here?
Yeah, so I'm working on a book. That's part of it. I want to be able to write my life story and be able to get it out there, not just for video or audio, but to read, right? Because a lot of people like to read. Not everybody likes to listen. So I'm working on that. I also want to be able to get certified in the state of Maryland and West Virginia because they kind of touch each other, and not in a weird way. Okay. They they kind of butt up against each other, and in the location I'm in, I'm kind of in a tri-state area: Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia. So I want to be able to do that. Ultimately, what I want to do is I want to get a trauma, addiction, mental health camp built where I can get people that are suffering from addiction, suffering from mental health disorders, suffering from trauma, and bring them in and have different counselors available, right? Different forms of therapy, because not everybody can learn from just sitting down and talking about their problems. Music therapy, art therapy, horse therapy, whatever, getting their hands dirty into some things to be able to release some of that stress. Yoga is great. Meditation is great. I love meditation. And then also a certified counselor on staff. And that's what I want to get, somebody that can actually bring them in and say, hey, look, how is this week going for you? And then on the back end, whatever they decide to prescribe to, so if they decide that they want to go to horse therapy, on the back end of that, they can get a belt buckle, or they can get a saddle to take with them as a reminder of what they experienced, or everything, like, working with Guitars for Vets, so that on the back end, if those vets decide that they want to take the music route, they get a guitar for free. Something to not just work toward, but achieve on the back end, right? Because not everybody can just sit down, buckle down, and do it. Sometimes we need a little bit of motivation to do it.
Agree. And horses are very therapeutic. I love horses. They really calm you. So I have a question. So you went through just some of the mental, so the audience is aware. Can you tell us like some of the mental challenges that you went through, like the disorders, because you're getting into this stuff, but I just want folks to see the connection of.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm open, and I'll talk about my diagnosis all day. I don't care. I was primarily diagnosed with post-traumatic stress with massive depressive disorder and alcohol dependency. So right off the bat, the PTSD part, a lot of it is due to my childhood trauma and then post-service trauma, but there's a lot that is military service connected. So working through that was really hard, because you run into the stigma of, you're a man, you can't talk about shit, right? Like, you have to be strong, you can't talk about shit. And so that was a barrier that I ran into. And then another one was being able to find that counselor that I could relate to, right? Because the VA appointed me a counselor and I didn't get along with her at all. And it wasn't that I didn't get along with her, it was the fact that she wasn't a veteran. She didn't understand the lingo that I was putting out. And then on top of that, when I would talk about something, she'd look at me and say, well, how does that make you feel? Well, I'm pissed right now because you keep parroting me. That's how I'm feeling. So I ended up finding another counselor. The counselor that I found was a veteran, and he was also in recovery for addiction. And so I was just like, you're my man. You're my man. And so like, I started working with him. Our sessions ended. I went to another clinic, and that guy had worked for 20 plus years working with people in addiction and mental health disorders, veterans. And I was just like, yes. So getting into counseling and staying in counseling, and then on top of that, I did this class that was called Moral Recognition Therapy, and it's reconnecting to who you are, right? And the first step for any 12-step program is the hardest, and that's admitting that you have a problem, right? And the first step to this program was admitting that you are the problem. And I just looked at this shit and I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to handle this. Because I had to admit to everything that I had done, right? I had to tell some of these secrets and the confidence of this group. And I just looked at myself as the worst human being ever when I was talking about it. But on the back end, I felt a little bit better about it. And then I would say with the depression, that is something that I worked on, and I would say I still have moments of depression, but it's not like ruling my life like it used to. But that was a constant work for a good majority of my recovery.
And with you, I noticed, you've obviously kind of done some work on how to, things you can do to try to get into to kind of sway the addiction. What kind of therapy worked best for you? When you kind of described artistic or animal, or, what did you prefer in your kind of exploration of therapies?
So I started out actually prior to getting into recovery, I started doing music therapy for my traumatic brain injury. For a lot of people that don't know, the arts, music, drawing, sculpture, anything that is the arts, it helps create new neural pathways in your brain to remember things. And so because of the traumatic brain injury, which is just a fancy term for a lot of concussions. I had real bad memory issues. So I got into music therapy, and that helped me out tremendously because I was learning instruments. So I started out playing the ukulele, and then I moved to guitar, then I moved to drums, and I started writing music. I haven't put anything out, but I started writing music. And with that, like that shaped it into being able to put feelings and emotions onto paper and see them unfold the way that I wanted to, not just the way that they were going to come out. Because if they were going to come out unscripted, it was going to come out super angry, super aggressive, and that's not what I wanted. So music therapy helped me out a lot. Individual counseling helped me out tremendously. Group therapies were great because I was able to relate to a lot of the people that were in there, and I actually learned a lot of good shit. Right, like I had this bias. I had a few bias, but I had a bias where I was like, you can't get addicted to crack like that. And I have a buddy that was like, the first time I hit that crack, I was addicted, and I was like, what? And then I learned about medication assisted treatment, Matt, and I was like, but you're still doing drugs to stay sober, like. And then I found out one of my best friends from the Army, was a heroin addict and a meth addict for years after he got out, and he uses MAT to stay sober. And I was like, yeah, but you're still doing it. And he's like, my dosage from what I've used to where I am now, completely decreased. And he was like, I don't want to be on this much longer. And I was like, wow, okay, this is what it's all about.
Just to, whatever works.
Yeah.
It looks like as long as you have the, intention behind it to get better, you'll be just fine. With so much they got these days for y'all to do, like, all y'all got to do is try. Just make that first step. As you said, if you're even not in treatment, the first part is just admitting that you have it, or that there is a problem. So, even if you can't pay the bucks to get into treatment or any of that, that is, once you realize that, you accept the help that most people are probably trying to give you.
Yeah, but you know that there's a few programs. There are free programs. AA, NA is, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. They got Cocaine's Anonymous. They got Sexaholics Anonymous. They have it all. Like, all you have to do is find that program that fits you. And you could go to a group and be like, nah, this isn't the group for me, and go and find a whole nother one. Right? They got Zoom meetings where you can get on Zoom and you can talk to people. It's absolutely free. All you got to do is have the dedication to follow through with it.
Absolutely. Demetria, do you have any more questions before?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and do it because I know we're gonna reverse because yours is quicker than mine. Can you give can you give the audience, and I know you have given some tips and advice on what to do. Can you give them two things, some advice on starting the process to healing that helped you?
Do it for yourself. Don't do it for anybody else. I always had a problem, and I always tried to, quote unquote, get better for other people, and it never worked, because when those other people left, I didn't have nobody to be sober for. I had nobody to work for, so I had to do it for myself. And that part, the work, do it for yourself portion, has been the most beneficial thing to me, because I had this earth-shattering event that happened in December, life-shattering event, and I'm still sober through it because I did it for myself, not for anybody else. If I would have done it for them, we probably wouldn't be talking right now, guys. But the second thing is if you do relapse, you can always come back, right? Don't feel ashamed. Your own worst enemy is you, right? You're the one that tells yourself, hey, I'm not going to be accepted back here. You know how many times I've relapsed? A lot. You know how many times everybody's relapsed? A lot. Nobody does it perfect the first time. That's why we're still here.
That was powerful.
Yeah.
Very powerful. And I'm going to make a post about it. I'm going to tag you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. So now we are at coming up, or we're at our hour. This is the time we like to take to call shameless plug. It looks like we have your link tree, what normally has a lot of different things going on within it. So if you could give the viewers a little bit of how they can get in contact with you, utilize your services, again, what you have going on, what you have working on, or if any of our viewers can help you towards that goal, direct them to the right spot.
Sweet. Okay, so you can find me on Facebook under Sean Young. I will always answer DMs. I don't even care if they're sent and they're sent to my spam file. I'm going to go look at them because I want to help as many people as I can. You can also look up my podcast page on Facebook at Sitting with Sean. I'm on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. So if you like to see my ugly bearded face, then you go to YouTube. If you want to just hear my voice, then you can go to Apple or Spotify. And if you want to be a guest, all you got to do is contact me. Facebook is probably the best bet because I'm really on Facebook all the time. I'm not really on Instagram or Twitter. I don't even like Twitter because people are nasty on Twitter, right? But Instagram, I get on there every once in a while. You can also find me on TikTok at The Beard of West Virginia. And yeah, some things I'm working on. I talked about my book. I just got done recording like 5 months worth of content. So there's going to be something that comes out. Actually, my next episode comes out in a minute. It debuts in a minute. Yeah, there's that. And, I'm just working on a whole bunch of different things. I'm going to have a veterans podcast I'm going to be starting up. It's going to be a little light-hearted and a little bit more fun, a little bit more educational. And then I have another one that I'm going to be starting very soon. It's called I Believe, where we talk about different people's belief structures, right? I don't care if you're Christian, Muslim, satanic, whatever. You have a belief structure, and I want to hear about it. So that's what I'm working on.
I love it. And I've also been a guest on Sean's podcast. So
yes, you have.
If you want to get on, I'll refer you over too. So that's the game. So we're supporting each other.
Absolutely.
Sean, I want to thank you for being a guest on Unfiltered Unspoken podcast. You have a lot of wisdom to go through what you have been through, especially at your age, right? People think it's no age to it is. Traumas affect us through our life, but you have taken a lot of measures to recover, so it's a blessing to see that, especially out of a male.
Well, thank you for having me. I've had a great time.
My pleasure. So we're going to close it out again. Thank you for tuning into Unfiltered Unspoken podcast, where we're going to continue to share life experiences, men, women, all nationalities. We're going to share it because your life experience may connect with someone else. And Sean said a few key key pointers. I apologize. Admitting you have the problem, but admitting you are the problem. And that is deep. Sometimes we have to admit that we are the problem so that we can start the journey to healing. And he also said something else. We relapse, but you can always come back. A lot of us relapse, not just off of addictions, but off of our life traumas, of personal lives, of domestic violence or childhood traumas. We relapse off of those because we live the life over and over again. So thank you for tuning in to Unfiltered Unspoken podcast, where we're going to continue to share life experiences to help others going through similar situations. I'm sorry, y'all. Look, hold on one second. Sorry, y'all.